Welcome everyone. I see people are still logging on, so I will leave a few minutes until everybody is with us. But welcome to the 2022 Journal of Hospitality and Tourism Management Online Research Symposium. It's really my pleasure to open up our two-day, half-day online research seminar for all of you. We had a really high increased interest by many people from international. I know many of you probably are not here with us because we have a maximum number of 300 people attending, but we are recording the sessions and everyone who has registered is going to receive the videos later on. So let me first of all quickly introduce our journal. The Journal of Hospitality and Tourism Management is one of the leading journals in the world in the category of tourism and hospitality. It is owned by Coffee, and by this opportunity I would like to really thank Coffee for the administrative support and of course all the support that is given to the journal and to us. The Journal of Hospitality and Tourism Management has an impact factor at the moment 7.629. According to the latest statistics, we are one of the 10 top journals in our field. And of course, this wouldn't have been achieved with all the support of all our audience, including the editorial team, the authors, the reviewers, and of course, all the readers citing the journal as well. So I would really deeply like to thank every one of you. As a journal and as an association supporting it, we really want to give back to the community for all the support we get. The journal has initiated some very good initiatives that they receive good attention from every one of you. One of these initiatives is the online research symposium that we are kicking off just now. But another important one is the Best Paper PhD Awards, which are also done on an annual basis. We are going to give the awards for this year in January, and we are soon going to announce the call for the awards for 2023 as well. So please watch the space. A third initiative we also do is a paper research hackathon. You might have the opportunity to attend one of them during the previous years. And again, we will have one for 2023, and a call of it is going to be announced soon. But here we are collected for an online research symposium, and it is my pleasure to announce that we have a very rich and intense program over the 2 days. We have two eminent keynote speakers, one from industry and one from academia, which you will hear soon. We also have two discussion panels, one which includes a mixture of academic and researchers and industry speakers, and the topic is about sustainability. And the second one, which is basically an aggregation of leading editors, tourism editors and hospitality editors journals, and they're going to talk about the topic of how we can research and make an impact to industry as well. We also going to have and offer many workshops that they are focusing on different research topics and issues. Most of them, they will run in parallel. There are usually 2 parallel research workshops that they are offered. If you do see that you cannot enter one of them, this means that probably the session is full. Don't get demotivated. Please log into the other one. This is because, as I explained before, we have a maximum cap of 300 people per session, but all sessions are going to be video recorded. I hope you will enjoy the online research symposium. Please take the opportunity to make it as interactive as possible and ask questions. And I would not like to take longer. I would simply say a big thank you to everyone. first of all, to my whole editorial team for the support for creating the program, chairing, but also presenting. I will name one of them one by one, and I will give them the floor to say a welcome and a brief introduction as well in a minute. But before I go, I would also like to thank my volunteering team, chaired by Fani Efthimiadou, who has been very supportive and helpful during the last months to co-organize and put everything together so we can be live with you today and tomorrow. So thank you very much, Fani, and all the members of the organizing committee, John Pauri, Laxi Seneviratha, Danny Wan, Liu Yang, and Xing Yang. So let me introduce you our editorial team, which you will also have the chance to meet during the conference as well. I would like to first give the floor to Edmund Go, who is one of our associate editors. Edmund, the floor is yours.
All right, thanks a lot, Marianna. So good afternoon, everyone. It is very exciting to see so many familiar faces. Thank you for supporting JHTM with your quality submissions and what Marianna said. You are the key to our journal's success. So yes, my name is Edmund. Yes, and I'm currently working at Bonn University. I'm going to be starting my position as associate professor in 2023. I've been one of the associate editors of JHTM since 2021, and I mainly manage the hospitality and hotel related submissions. So something exciting tomorrow, I'm presenting a workshop on using Leximancer in tourism, hospitality, and events. And I hope to see you, and hopefully you enjoy the rest of the symposium. Thank you.
Thank you, Edmund. And Cici.
Thank you, Marianna. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining with us for this JHTM research symposium. And my name is Leung. I am associate professor at the University of North Texas. I'm new to the journal JHTM. I just joined the editorial board last year, but I've enjoyed working with everyone. And thank you so much for all your support from our authors and readers and reviewers. I mainly deal with the submissions with hospitality and technology related topic. And I'm also dealing with a lot of experimental design articles. In fact, in 2 hours, I'm going to host a workshop on the topic of experimental design, and I hope I will see you there. And everyone, I hope you enjoy this workshop, this symposium, and have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you, Cici. And Mostafa.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, based on wherever you are. Here in Malaysia is midnight, so it's morning, Wednesday morning. Welcome to a research symposium, JHTM 2022 research symposium. Very happy to have you in this research symposium. I'm Mostafa Rasoolimanesh, Associate Professor in Taylor's University and the Director of the Center for Research and Innovation in Tourism and Sustainable Tourism Impact Lab. I've been with Journal from 2020, and I handle most of time tourism, sustainable tourism, and destination management and marketing papers. So if you have a paper in this area and got rejected, you can kill me for rejecting your paper. Actually, my area is more on sustainability, sustainable tourism, and heritage tourism. Hope you enjoy these 2 days research symposium and benefit from different workshops, keynotes, and panels that we will have during these 2 days. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mostafa. and our fourth associate editor, Joan.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. 你好，大家好. Okay, I am currently, I'm also just like a CC. I'm new to this editorial team, but I have been enjoying working with such an amazing team. But most importantly, thank you very much for your support for submitting all the wonderful works, from whole the world. Basically, I handle the sustainability in consumer behavior and in event and hospitality. So I would say once again, thank you very much for taking your time to join us today. Yeah, and I hope you will enjoy the 2-day symposium, and welcome.
Thank you, Joan. JHTM also publishes book reviews. We have a book review editor to oversee this area. Tham. Aaron, would you like to take the floor?
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Aaron, and I'm based at the University of the Sunshine Coast in Australia. My role in the journal is to curate a list of book reviews from different authors and reviewers who might be interested to showcase their new books in the journal. I've been with the journal on different capacities, reviewer, and now on as book reviews editor. And looking forward to see many of you in the coming future with your books as well. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And last but not least, I realized I haven't introduced myself. I just took for granted you all know me since I'm a big star. This is Professor Marianna. I'm the editor-in-chief of Journal of Hospitality and Tourist Management. I have a great support from a whole team, as you can see, but usually you take the whole blame of paper rejections, as usual. I hope I also take the pride when a paper is accepted, and I really like making people happy, and I hope I can make everyone happy, actually. But apart from that, some useful information, as you have realized, we are really proud that we are a very international team of people representing the journal. The journal is multidisciplinary. You have heard that many of our associate editors, they represent many different disciplines, methodologies, research areas in tourism and hospitality. We do welcome papers that they relate to all different sectors in tourism, including events, leisure, sports, destination management, hotels, restaurants, cruises, you name it. So we are a very inclusive journal. We don't really specialize on any particular topic, methodology, and we would really very much like to receive your paper and help you go through the review process and hopefully publish it as well. For my part, I have no more issues to raise in terms of the journal. As I mentioned before, we have a very rich program. I hope you do enjoy it. We will kick off the session just today with one of our keynote speakers, which you will have the pleasure to enjoy very soon. The topic is about sustainability. As you have imagined, the reason why we have selected to focus on research and sustainability relates to the fact that COVID has made sustainability even more important, and we really need to pay attention to that. So I would like to close this session, give you the time to get ready for our keynote speaker. Take a glass of wine, coffee, water, milk, depending on your time zone, and get ready for it. Thank you, everyone. I hope you do enjoy the 2 full days, and thank you for joining us. See you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Don't leave. We will continue keynote in this room. So please remain here, stay here. and we will start in 15 minutes.
Okay.
Okay, hello everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, based on wherever you are. Welcome to JHTM 2022 Research Symposium. I'm Dr. Mostafa Rasoolimanesh. I will be moderator for this session, Associate Editor of Journal of Hospitality and Tourism Management. Before starting this session, let me do some announcement and housekeeping. For a program that we will have during these 2 days, you can enter different part of program with the specific Zoom link. I believe all of you received the program from organizers, research symposium organizers, and for each workshop or panel or keynote, you can find a specific Zoom link. So you can join Zoom link for each session. Today we will have a few workshop and keynote. Now we will have a keynote for today. In a short while, I will introduce our speaker, keynote speaker for this session. After this keynote speaker, we will have 2 parallel workshops on research agenda for event management and event tourism, and also design and publish mixed method research. So we will have 2 workshops based on your interest. You can attend one of the workshops that you like and you are interested. We will continue with the 2 more parallel workshops on experimental design in hospitality and tourism, and also projective research exploring prediction and insight in hospitality. So we will have this second parallel workshops, and then at the end of today we will have a discussion panel on sustainability in tourism and hospitality and event, a refreshed research agenda. So you can see we will have a diverse program, and you can enjoy different parts of our program today, and tomorrow we will have also keynote and parallel workshops and panel discussion. So you can join any of the any part of program that you are interested. So let me start this session. This keynote session, we have Professor Willy Legrand. Professor Willy Legrand is the professor at the IU International University of Applied Science in Germany. Over the past 2 decades, he has established over 2 dozen undergraduate and graduate courses on sustainable development in business and hospitality management in Europe, South and North America, the Middle East, and Asia. He is lead author of Sustainability in Hospitality Industry, Principles of Sustainable Operations, and he chairs the Hospitality Network panel on sustainability in hospitality. Dr. Willy Legrand is an editorial board member and reviewer of over a dozen academic publications. He has published over 60 academic papers in leading journals and conferences on tourism, hospitality, and sustainable development. He holds keynotes and participates as panelist in global tourism and hospitality conferences. He is co-editing a new book called Critical Questions in Sustainability and Hospitality for 2023. Sustainability, and discuss about sustainability for 5 decades. So it's not a new concept, but especially after SDG, Sustainable Development Goals in 2015, and particularly after COVID, we can see this concept is actually the core of discussion, and we can see more attention for these concepts, sustainability in hospitality and tourism. And today we have Professor Willy Legrand to talk about this important concept and future agenda for sustainability in hospitality and tourism. Professor Legrand, floor is yours.
Thanks very much. What an introduction. I don't know where you got all of this information. This is great. Thanks. It's now I have to live up to my own bio. It's amazing. Thanks very much. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, good night, I guess, for you, Mostafa. Thanks very much for this introduction, Mostafa, and as well to Marianna and to the editorial team here at the JHTM. I mean, it's really an honor to be here and actually to talk about a topic which is really close to me. And probably it's close to me because I've got a background in geography and in corporate environmental management as well as marketing. But you know, there are obviously increasing questions being raised, as you mentioned, on how best to tackle the mounting climate biodiversity crises. You know, how do we go about managing our lives, really managing our lives, and to live within our means, or that is the planetary boundaries, while also ensuring, of course, acceptable social foundations. So with this in mind, today I'll take 30-40 minutes of your time, your precious time, to look at the research gaps, the opportunities, challenges in sustainable tourism and hospitality. Now, for the records, what you're looking at right now, I'm just trying to move my slides. Here we go. What you're looking at now is the famous or well-known warming stripes, which is a visual representations of the changes in temperature as measured in each countries and then over the past 100 years. And that's the work of Prof. Ed Hawkins at the University of Reading. I find that graphic actually to be really excellent because it's so simple to start a conversation about climate and the risk of climate and bridge it to tourism and to hospitality. And the last stripe that you see here on this graph is actually 2021. Year 2022 is not even on there, but the estimates place the year at around 1.2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, and thus it's the 8th year in a row where the temperature exceed 1 degree threshold. And of course, the impact has been felt across the globe in form of particularly disastrous weather events, of course, but it's impacting the livelihood of so many, right? And ravaging infrastructures, including our tourism infrastructure. It's costing us dearly. It's costing the global community dearly. And so, in fact, we have a massive carbon curve and we have yet to flatten it, or as we know, to bend it, really. We know how, actually, we have the tools for, but I guess the realization is not to act on climate is still missing. But it's knocking at our door and we haven't managed that curve, and that's the Keeling curve as we know it. Now, I find this interesting because the curve also represents the amount of sustainability research output across all fields, if you will, over the past decade. I mean, I look at it into many fields: engineering science, natural science, life and humanities, social science. Increasingly, what we're seeing a mismatch a little bit about the inertia, right? The inertia we see in negotiating rooms, such as COP27, for example. There are a few positive outcomes, but a lot of it is not necessarily very positive. And I was there at COP21 way back in Paris in 2015. So we see a bit of inertia, and that's the mismatch with what I see happening in academia, at least in research, and across parts of civil society, actually. And I find this quite interesting as well. And that sets partly the stage. And the stage here is best set, I guess, with a quote from a French poet, and actually Paul Valéry, who's an advocate of logical positivism, which really reads quite simply: everything simple is false, everything complex is unusual. And that the current reality where we see that convergence of global risk, right? When you look at it, like climate, biodiversity, socioeconomics, geopolitics, you know, all coined as the global polycrisis, really, probably represent Paul Valéry's quote in action. Reality is complex. You know, phenomena are complicated, interdependent, at times paradoxical. So in short, the world is complex, and of course, complex, its raw state, right, is complex, is unusable. So we have to research, we have to analyze, we have to structure and express, we have to formulate, represent, to simplify it without betraying the complexity. And I think this is really our job, isn't it, as researchers? Things are complex, things are messy, especially in sustainability. How do we do it? Bring it across to an audience without betraying the complexity. That's probably the hardest job, in fact, for researchers in those days, but also for those in class, right? Working with students. So that basically sets the stage. If we look at how the sustainability approaches related to business in a way has evolved, we can roughly look into 4 rough stages with possible actions or possible integration into business. And so we can go back in time to the commissioned by the Club of Rome, The Limits to Growth, right? The first bestseller, if you will, on environmental issues, which challenges the concept of exponential economic and population growth on a finite planet. So it's taken businesses quite a few years to actually internalize any of this. And to a far extent, we haven't yet figured out the best way. I'm reading articles every day about, oh, it's time now to manage energy. It's time now to manage water. I mean, this is stuff that's been actually mentioned for decades, really. That's what Mostafa was saying as well. So we haven't yet quite figured out how to decouple business growth to negative impacts. And the best example being decoupling emissions to business outputs. And so the limit to growth was really the first step into that direction. Elkington with a triple bottom line. This is something that academics quite like. Of course, it's nice to teach that as well. The 3 pillars, quite emblematic of the people, planet, profit. Interesting, there's a great article in 2018 by John Elkington, published in the Harvard Business Review, that he argued that his own concept was in fact misinterpreted, that success and failure on sustainability goals actually cannot be measured only in terms of profit and loss. That is, he says, we must measure in terms of the well-being of billions of people, the health of our planet. And he argued that since the advent of TBL, so 25 years ago, the climate, the water, the oceans, the forest, the soil biodiversity, they're all increasingly threatened. So business commitment and performance on a voluntary basis has just not worked. And so that's exactly how we continued, in fact, because if you look at Archie Carroll's work on CSR, and especially the 4-part model of corporate social responsibility, also known as the pyramid of social responsibility, it's proposed that, was going to be, the businesses were going to be good corporate citizens, suggesting that businesses act as that public trustee, with an obligation to meet the interest of all stakeholders when making business decisions. But when you look at it, and that's been researched quite a bit, I mean, CSR has come out of fashion a little bit, partly to the fact that, let's face it, it's been hijacked by an industry that use it quite heavily to greenwash its way in greater sustainability. A lot of marketing, not necessarily followed by actions. And that's because CSR is not regulated whatsoever. Little to no third-party checks. Enters ESG. And that's quite interesting, in fact. And so environmental social governance, that's really taken quite center stage, right? Corporations demonstrate commitment to sustainability, transparency, management approach to how do we mitigate our impacts and how do we address externalities, such as Scope 3 emissions, for example. So we have interesting things going on, the EU Corporate Sustainability Directive, Reporting Directive, and the recent release of the standards that really seals the fate of ESG, I think. It's making reporting mandatory for large companies. So we've seen progress in some ways, although on a planetary scale, let's face it, we haven't since the early 70s, at the time when the limits to growth hit the shelves and I appeared on the fate of this planet, we've experienced 69% decline in wildlife population. That's from the latest Living Planet Index. Carbon increase in the atmosphere since 1970, we went from 325 parts per million to 417 parts per million this year. So that's a change that we haven't seen in 800,000 years. And then the Earth overshoot days moved from December 25th in 71 to this year, July 28. So even though we've had models, we've had, an industry that's involved, government that's been trying to put things in place, a civil society that's trying to act, researchers that are research. In fact, we have still dug ourselves a major black hole. So, that sets a little bit the stage, to be honest, for what's happening. So let's have a look at the research. The researchers, And overall, sustainability continues to be one of the most commonly discussed trends within the hotel industry. This is taken from Kim Barber and Kim in an article a couple of years ago. And it's probably the same in tourism and many other industry sectors, right? Simply because sustainability has become one of those large paradigm shift. And this is one of the reasons why we talk about it also in the journal here. One cannot escape it. It's a generational challenges, really. It's our generation and the next one, with plenty of intergenerational justice that is at stake, actually. So let's take a look at some selected comprehensive and systematic literature review. And I was just, this is not a very in-depth research because I didn't have the time, but I just wanted to bring across what has been done post-COVID-19, in fact, because you're right to say that there's a little bit of effervescence, we would say in French. So I apologize here with the long list. And I will make those slides available so you can all have a look at it for distribution. I only wanted to highlight the scale and scope here, looking at sustainability as, success factors, sustainability as, tourism development and competitiveness, sustainability as development and economic growth. So post-COVID, there's a clear emphasis on bridging sustainability with some form of growth model, which itself provides some issues, right? We realize that, but that's simply a reaction of having so little tourism for 2 years. So, growth model, while still, how do we consider how best to participate in achieving, for example, the sustainable development goals we were mentioning? And ultimately, we can say the story on hospitality is the same. I mean, the literature review is similar, although here, rather than tourism, and I will be focusing a bit more on hospitality for the rest of the presentation. The literature on tourism and sustainability is long and heavy. There's really a lot. The hospitality is slightly different, in fact, because it's often more purpose-driven. There's a specific purpose. We see review on sustainability indicators for hotel. We see on resource management. We see on consumer behavior. The willingness to pay is a good one. In some ways, I guess this is explained that there is some catching up here in this industry, both in the industry, but also in the research field, that we must do, considering that sustainable development and business has been on the agenda, let's face it, for over 2, 3, 4, 5 decades now. So planning a study really, focusing on the wrong question is a frequent cause of waste in research. I quite like this quote, hence, where completed and ongoing research should use to assess whether the research gap justify new research. And we all know that because you're all researchers, and that can inform the design, the conduct, the reporting of that research. So where do we stand on sustainability research is really what I'd like to tackle. And I'll be taking a slight turn, as I've mentioned now, to focus a bit more on hospitality related research rather than the broader tourism field. But first, let's agree that there are still no standard methods for identifying, prioritizing, or reporting research gap, or perhaps we agree to disagree. The term research gap itself is not even standardized. It's on a research context. We can use the definition here from different institutes. I've used the one from the National Collaborating Center for Methods and Tools, which described that a research gap as a research question for which missing or insufficient information limits the ability to reach a conclusion. Of course, there are frameworks on identifying research gap from systematic reviews, for example, that I've just presented. You can use the PICOS for population intervention, comparison, outcome, and setting. So figuring out if there is insufficient information or biased information or incorrect information, for example. And so here I decided, okay, let's use this article by Nayan Chuka and colleagues called A Scoping Review Describes the Methods Used to Identify, Prioritize, and Display Gaps in Health Research. So what the authors did is they provided, or they reported 12 variations on the concept of research gap. And I thought this was interesting and categorized those related to, for example, missing information. So there's 3 categories. The first one is missing information, where that could be, for example, an absolute evidence gap, where there's basically little evidence from primary studies is available. And so that would be the absolute evidence gap, or the practical knowledge gap, also known as action knowledge conflict gap, where professional behaviors that we see or practices deviate from the research findings. or are not covered by research. And so this would be an important area, I think, in gaps in hospitality business research linked to sustainability, for example. Next, they've identified things such as inadequate information, such as population gap, when a research regarding a population is not adequately represented, such as many of the consumer behavior studies. And finally, the third is insufficient information, for example, research evidence knowledge gap, where not much information is available on a particular topic, or there's a lot of uncertainty about the accuracy of the existing evidence. And that we have certainly quite a bit on sustainability and the hospitality industry. So in fact, we have all those gaps. As far as I can see, we have all those gaps in sustainability research, in fact, simply because it's evolving so fast. And perhaps more worryingly is we actually do have a lot of scientific evidence on sustainability in general. Like if we think about the climate science right now, this is unbelievable. I mean, you know, they've been at it for a long time. We have more than 1,200 scenarios moving forward on the 1.5 degrees and plus available. But, you know, in fact, we have perhaps a greater gap to surmount here. The overall gap, perhaps because hospitality remains a practice-oriented industry, it's the knowing doing gap, which is really the disconnect between knowledge and action. The bottom line is that knowing is not enough. It's often not always enough, right? I mean, we have industry leaders that know about the situation. They may know about the research that's being conducted, but actions that are put in place are lacking. And so the question is then whether research can help to remedy that situation. So let's dive and look at a few specific past studies in sustainability and hospitality. I did opt for a study conducted by the colleagues Kim Barber and Kim, as I mentioned, published a bit earlier in 2019, and which specifically look at the status of sustainability research in the hotel industry. And that works out well for what I wish to present here today, as you will see a bit later. So the author's aim here is to answer the following three questions. What are the main research subject of previous sustainability studies? What are the implications of those past studies? And what are the primary subject of the future sustainability studies? So I thought this was interesting. A meta-analysis was conducted then for this with review categories, and they looked at, you know, citation frequencies, the journal reputation, impact factors, etc., and then selected 128 studies at the end for the analysis, and then they had different categories. So I'll spare you with all details, but feel free to go and have a look, and I'll jump straight into some of the output. Out of those 99 articles, what were the category that were particularly prominent? And the topic of sustainability management was quite prominent. 16 articles were in the topic of energy conservation. 7 articles were under the topic sustainability education, and then consumer behavior with 5 articles. Now, the articles related to sustainability management, the bulk of them, generally discuss the investigation of the relationship between sustainability and hotel management. That includes, you know, hotel managers' attitudes towards environmental management, for example, or hotel characteristic that has an influence on the environmental policies, for example. The energy conservation, much more hands-on. We're looking at hotel practices and the financial impact, such as what are the cost-saving opportunities, so based on case study often. And that would include variables such as looking at age of building, type of hotels, etc. Some articles looked actually at the importance of sustainability in education, in hospitality education programs, to try to see, you know, the impact of which sustainability would enhance managerial skills, for example. In the methodology methods, then, you know, slightly, I mean, quite a split between quantitative articles and qualitative articles and mixed method articles. In most quantitative articles, in fact, it was heavily self-administrative surveys that were to collect the data from the participants, such as whether they're hotel representative, hotel managers, employees, and customers, for example. And finally, for me, the most interesting out of this was, what came out of this? And then, you know, what were each of these articles pointing out to future research? And out of this, there was 142 articles that suggested that environmental management, including what would be responsible practices, were mentioned. Another large part is about energy, so resource management, energy, water, heating, ventilation, cooling, etc. 35 mentioned sustainable development practices. And so on this list, sustainable report, if you see at the bottom here, so only 3 mentioned, I find this interesting because that's probably set to change quite a bit. I mean, if we consider here in the EU, where I'm located, where we have the reporting directive that's coming into place, de facto forcing large companies to report, that's going to be a critical step. Another one which I found interesting is benchmarking, which is very low on this case and certainly underutilized in the industry. So there's probably a job here to be done for research. Absent from the list is the need to study ethical behavior. I think probably training as well. The concept of mindfulness is something that's coming around, especially with a young crowd that wants an alignment between their values and whatever the employees is offering, but also from the consumer's point of view, so the alignment between consumers and company perspective. And beyond that, probably the understanding of what actually constitutes an ethical experience, for example, a long-lasting impacts from the side of well-being. So that's probably also missing there. There is another study, I didn't put it there, there's another study that was conducted not too long ago, published in 2022, that did a similar job and came to actually similar conclusions. So I decided not to put it there. So with this in mind, sustainability has become a critical perspective in managing firms via a holistic approach by considering economics, so those three pillars, right? Environmental, social, etc. So here I enter a slightly more personal view on the topic here from just doing this for over 20 years now. From my own observation, not necessarily following a strict research pattern here, but simply I wish to share those observations with all of you. You do whatever you want with those along the way. So from when I keep reading, there is a series of recurring theories that are trying to explain what's going on actually in regards to consumers, to sustainability, to business, to governance, for example. So some of it, stakeholder theory keeps coming back. We see a bit of an evolution here, and it's best represented by I think for me, it's best represented by the quote from Paul Hawken. It's a book called The Ecology of Commerce that I read back when I was in university in the early 1990s, that said the promise of a business is to increase the general well-being of humankind through service, creative invention, and ethical philosophy, which I think was quite neat, actually. Stewardship theory, mentioned a lot, planned behavior theory, especially looking at the behavior of consumers, used a lot. Ecological modernization theory, trying to see the links between market mechanism and business, the economic competitiveness, etc. System theory has been mentioned regularly as well. Social exchange theory in the workplace, especially looking at employees and how they can contribute to improve sustainability, often misunderstood actually. And then resilience, of course, especially now, COVID, post-COVID. So, very actual, actually, regarding business resilience, referring to our ability to manage the crisis. So we have that. And then we have our sustainability dimension as proposed by the three pillars and as implemented into the businesses with the different components of it. There's really hundreds of topics there to consider when we develop, activate a holistic sustainability approach. Plenty of unanswered questions. And then that derives massive amount of themes really that we keep seeing, but really not all of it is tackled very well. We have anything from the value creation through sustainability, which isn't understood. It's often about the willingness to pay for sustainability, but we don't see very much on how about the value of sustainability. Identifying reporting impacts along the value chain, so impacts indicators for a hotel themselves. There's a research, but how about along the value chain, which is very important. Management of risk, of course. So each theme here is a clear practical managerial relevance, and there are both small and large gaps to fill, in fact. So, how do we then move to the next part, to the final part? How do we enter this, activating of sustainability equally in research as it is in business, for example? And I think it's shifting from the what in many cases to the how, or perhaps how fast. And what I mean by how fast is how fast can we research to support that sustainability transformation, really? And how fast can the industry adopt new models to mitigate, cope with that increased uncertainty? And keeping in mind that everything we do should be as simple as can be, but not simpler. That's a quote from Albert Einstein. So I decided to say, okay, let's have a look at this evolving concept. And I've taken the work from Drewbury and Fletcher, old paper that conceptualize this continuum of two polar opposite of sustainability. In business, I've adapted that to hospitality. On the left side of that continuum, you see sustainability is considered an aspect of hospitality, right? Whereas the other end on the right-hand side is sustainability as the context itself, and hospitality as an aspect or a component of it. So if we embrace the view that hospitality is the main context, which is business-driven approach, sustainability remains a component that must be dealt with within that business context. If we embrace the view that sustainability is the ultimate context, that really nothing else matters, then integration of sustainability into business or any aspect of living on this planet occurs naturally, because sustainability is the end goal, rather than just the advancement of hospitality or business, for example. So I'm not saying that one approach is necessarily better than the other one. I'm just saying this is a little bit what we see happening, and that it changes the way that we conduct research, in fact, a little bit, because one aspect is rather multidisciplinary by nature, such as the right-hand side here, embracing the implication of global goals, the Paris Agreement, for example, the SDGs was mentioned. And then you can zoom into the field of business, bearing in mind that one doesn't exclude the other, of course, but rather present immense opportunities to advance sustainability overall. So when we consider the era that we're in now, so we think often the Anthropocene or the Piraeus for some, so the era that we burn our way through fossil fuel. Perhaps this is a doorway to the Symbiocene, where we finally learn to live with our environment. And this is certainly one of the goals of the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, by the way. But we're back to the very beginning. We're back to the curves, right? And we haven't bent. There's two. I showed two of them. So the climate curve, the Keeling curve, and then the extinction curve. And we tend to have a focus on carbon. We have a bit of a carbon tunnel vision. It's very important to talk about carbon. And if you look, and I was mentioning about those 1,200 scenarios here, out of those scenarios, there's really 100 that are still available to stick to the 2-degree Paris Agreement. So it's not very many. And if we're very stricter, actually, and we try to stick to 1.5 degree, and then we're down to a couple dozen, if. And here, I think at the hospitality and tourism industry, in fact, we're at the forefront of any of those topics. So the consequences of the climate pathways we decide via our elected government, via, right, every decision that's being made has got impacts, massive impacts on the way we're going to develop this industry, the way we're going to adapt in the different destinations, in the way we're going to develop hotels. I see 14,000 hotels in the pipeline, 6,000 are being constructed. How many are constructed as net zero or carbon neutral? It's a minority. It's wild, right? This is a wild. So I think there's really quite a bit here. And the same applied for net zero commitment. As I said, there's really a lot to be done here moving forward. So, I want to make sure that I'm on time. So, but I think I am on time, so that's good. At the end of the day, I think, we're all subject to those risks. When we actually look at those climate pathways, we're subject to those risks, and that means really double materiality. And I see opportunity here for research. So we depend on stable climate, biodiversity, ecosystem services. That means that any disruption there from those natural cycles have got an impact on us, positive, negative, on the financial performance of a business. That's our financial materiality. But at the same time, whatever we do, again, positively, negatively impact the biodiversity, the climate, through our operation, through our product, etc. And so that's the social materiality. And that means identifying risk. And this is where I think we're behind a little bit, at least in the industry, but also in the research. And to stick with climate only, if we think about extreme weather event, they've already damaged many assets this past summer. We've seen Pakistan, we've seen it in Germany the year before. The infrastructure, it displaces communities, it disrupts supply chain, the business operation, the tourist stays away. So the risk carried by these changes are the physical risks. And then, of course, if we hope to manage, if we want to limit those climate change, that will require also a transition in the way we do business. And we think about the global energy system, we think about food, agriculture, etc. And so this is all very uncertain path to decarbonize economy. But this is very important because, and this is where I link to the pathway policies, to what I've said earlier, everything hangs on what we decide to do as a global community. If we go for 1.5 degree, we will have plenty of transition risk. And what are the consequences? The businesses don't know themselves. This is where we can help at research. If we decide for a 5-degree pathway, forget the transition risks, because business is going to be business as usual, but there will be plenty of physical risk to face with. And I think this is where it becomes quite interesting for us to actually look into this, into the value at risk, depending on the climate pathways. I think there's massive amount of opportunities for multidisciplinary approach. We know our industry, we know tourism, we know hospitality. Let's get those climate guys on board. Let's get others from other fields, and let's do that research to be able to have a better picture of where we're heading. So for me, it's never been as important to do this. And really, that's a great deal of transformation to build resiliency. And so I want to come closely to the end. If we think of the two major components at play here to move the needle, and often it comes down to technology and behavior. And we can try to work out the who, the what, the how, then when on any of those topics that I'm going to be listing here. And I'm sorry about the list, but this is just, as I said, it's a very personal list of things that I think we still have. In fact, we still don't know sometimes the what. We still need definitions at some of those topics. So I'm just going to list a whole bunch of them here and just point out to a few. I've done quite a bit of work on net zero. This is something that's amazing because net zero is being used under all different types of recipes and sauces in this industry, but not only in our industry. Why is simply because there is abuse of this. There's abuse of the words by the industry, partly because only on zero energy buildings, I've got more than 20 different ways to describe and define a zero energy building alone. Some of the topics are calling for more advanced research, of course. That's why I have it a bit as a pyramid-like, if you will. And, if barriers and motivators in activating decarbonization, defining net positive, applying regenerative hospitality, indicators to do that, indicators to circularity, methodology to develop linked to the EU taxonomy for us, corporate culture and individual value alignment to drive sustainability. I mean, these are part of the many larger gaps, in fact, and I'm sure there's plenty more also of smaller gaps in between. The same can be said in terms of, by the way, my slides are going to be available. So if in case you're interested in all of this, I've sent that to Marianna so she can certainly pass it around. The same can be said into business education. I find this extremely important. I mean, many of us are educators around this table. Is business education equipped to deal with the crisis of the Earth system? I mean, business education, as far as I can see, is a big part of why we're in this trouble in the first place. And if we look at the function, the way that many universities have set up business education, I mean, it's basically a representation of the business structure in many ways. And the best, businesses have been trying to implement sustainability at best, transcending all those functions. But how are universities doing it? And this is quite interesting. There's actually increased amount of research in other fields in sustainability about that integration of sustainability. And, a lot of it has been just adding guest speakers to specific session. I mean, it's nice enough to do that, but we're not going to achieve anything by just doing that. There's it's an easy method to reach the students to have that. There is something called the academic freedom, of course, we all know. So we may decide or not what we include into our course. So we may decide to have a guest speaker, and we call this piggybacking. But of course, there are we can include special courses. This is an advanced way in a way to the curriculum. So let's add ESG reporting, or let's add CSR. So let's dig deep, right? Digging deep onto this. So it's similar to piggybacking, uncomplicated, right? And so on. Of course, we can try to mainstream the whole thing and integrate sustainability here. So mainstreaming would help, because then we're talking about financial management, and suddenly we have the impact of climate change on financial markets are discussed, or accounting, where we then discuss the internalization of the externalities as a cost factor, and so on. And so there's a lot here. I think on the business education research side, there's actually quite a bit that could be done. And here too, there's different barriers and enablers in terms of how is the university culture adapting to new reality of business. That's critical concern to the students, of course, that are thinking of going through the ranks, but sometimes coming out of universities with antiquated programs, really. So yeah, I mean, ultimately, you could say, so what to all of this? Are we fostering humanity's ability to change and innovate? Ultimately, you ask your questions: what problems, what contradiction, what uncertainties can be identified? How these problems have been addressed elsewhere? are those problems to be addressed? How do we address them? How do we solve them? Why haven't we solved them so far? What are the method X, Y, Z to use? Why has nobody used those methods, etc.? I think there's plenty to be done here. I hope this gave you some insights. I mean, this was a little bit, I'm conscious of the time. I want to thank you and leave you with the biodiversity stripes. I started with the climate stripes, so I might as well finish with the biodiversity stripes. Slightly different here because it's from dark green to gray, which shows that 69% decrease in wildlife population for the past 50 years. That's the work of Mal Richardson here, a prof in the UK. And so I wish to say thank you. Stay in touch via LinkedIn if you want to. I wish you really an excellent JHTM Research Symposium. I'm glad that the focus is on sustainability, and I'm looking forward to the panels and the discussions along the next 2 days. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Willy. Really rich and informative presentation and discussion. I'm a sustainability person, so I'm a fan of sustainability, and I've done research on sustainability for years. But really, I enjoy your presentation, Willy, and I learn a lot. So I will try to digest.
Sorry, when Professor Marianna asked me to do this, I'm thinking I just didn't know where to start. There is so much going on, but this is why I took a bit of a personal approach at the end to sort of piece it together. But ultimately, yes, it's
very interesting.
Lots of gaps too.
Yeah, and if you can share a slide, I think will be very useful for participants to go through later and see what they can find for their research. If I want to summarize before going to maybe 1 or 2 questions, because just we have a few minutes. So we started. Yeah, it's actually difficult for me to summarize because a lot of information, but I will do my best. So started with the evolution of sustainability in businesses and some topic like limit to growth, triple bottom line, and going to CSR and then ESG. So then he tried to explain about gap, what's the meaning of gap, and how before going to identifying gap in hospitality, well, we can understand the consistent, or we can have a consensus about the meaning of gap. So he explained about different categories of gap: missing information, inadequate information, or insufficient information. And then he moved to sustainability research and see what we have in sustainability concept. He reviewed a few theories in sustainability concept to identify research agenda and gap, like stakeholder theory, stewardship theory, theory of planned behavior, ecological modernization theory, system theories, social exchange theory, and resilience theory. And he also explained about an important concept that two different perspectives. Sustainability should be defined and identified under umbrella of hospitality, or hospitality can be a component of sustainability. So which perspective we look at sustainability? Actually, this concept can be linked to 2 main streams for discussion about sustainability. That we see sustainability as an approach to sustaining our business and sustaining industry, or we see sustainability in stream that contribution, and we discuss about contribution of tourism and hospitality to a bigger picture of sustainable development. Maybe can link these 2 perspectives in these 2 main stream of sustainability. And then he continue with who, what, how, and when, what we want to do, and who need to do something about sustainability, and when and how. That all actually can identify some concept to do research about sustainability. So hopefully I could very, very briefly summarize what you explained. But just, okay, based on our time, just let me go for one or two questions. One question, Willy, actually, this is a bit a practical question about sustainability, especially after COVID. You discuss about theoretical foundation for sustainability and gap for research. But one of the topic that nowadays is, especially after COVID, is very hot and critical. Tourism and hospitality industry after COVID, thinking about recovery. And recovery is main priority for them. So they shut down for the 2 years, 3 years, and now they start working and they want to compensate these 2-3 years. So in this context, when we talk about sustainability, someone maybe finds that this discussion is a bit weird. Why we talk about sustainability in this situation that industry need to recover, right? What do you think about this conflict? And okay, do you see any conflict between this recovery and sustainability? And also, if you see any conflict, what do you think can be solution for this, and how hospitality and tourism industry can be convinced to go and prioritize sustainability?
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, a lot of the emphasis was indeed on bouncing back, right? I mean, a lot of this was, can we go back to the numbers? Can we go back to 2019 rather than bouncing forward? I realize it's just a play on word here, but bouncing back means going back to the methods of production and consumption as we know it. So we want tourism volume. You want volume in heads in beds. That's what matters. Independent of the ongoing impact, even though we were quite aware. I mean, if you remember through the pandemic, it was pretty amazing that people were like, oh my God, I cannot believe that the water is blue and that I can see the mountains, whatever. They were amazed and, oh, we have to maintain this. How quick do we forget how beautiful this was for the sake of a recovery? But when we talk about recovery, we're talking here about an economic recovery, financial recovery above everything else. This is where there's a problem. I mean, it's going to bite back. This is basically what's happening. Is you know, the focus on short term is biting back. It's biting back every day. In fact, I mean, you know, if you look at the emissions for 2022, we're back to breaking the records. I mean, it's as if we've learned nothing. So, you know, and we know that this is going to be problematic for us. Destinations are already suffering. I mean, we have one right here. I live 30 kilometers away from a very, very touristy destinations. It's called the Ah Valley. Beautiful. It's a wine region. The infrastructure is gone. I mean, this is the right from impacts of extreme weather event that we've never seen before. The intensity, this is what's happening, is the intensity is just there of those events. This is not going to go away. And so, you know, we need that. So it is a recovery, but you can have, well, I mean, there's lots of debate, but you can have a green recovery, right? You have to leverage technology to transform that recovery. You can recover. It's about decoupling, right? It's about decoupling emissions, for example, from your growth. It's about reinvesting into your primary assets, which for a lot of destinations is the natural environment, the very reasons why people come there in the first place. And so it is about not only monetizing this, which is what we've been doing, which is fair enough, but the monetizing has got to be coming along with a responsibility to conserve and restore those areas. This is for the sake of our own business. So I see that there's struggles by the way that it's understood that the recovery is an economic recovery above everything else. But that is shooting ourselves in our own foot, to be honest. And we see also good practices. I mean, we see best practices in many destinations that have understood that going back to the high volume, high intense impact way of doing tourism is a dead end. And so that transformation needs to happen. And it's, you know, technology is a part of the transformation for a lot of the operators, but it's also plenty of behavior, in fact.
Thank you very much, Willy. There is another question that asks about regenerative tourism and ask, can we consider, because regenerative tourism is a new concept, especially after COVID, that we are not going back to pre-COVID situation. We can see growth, but in a different way and new business model. So the question is, regenerative model can be higher level of sustainability. We can consider higher level of sustainability and that consider different aspects, especially some aspect like well-being of people.
Yeah, I like it. I mean, I like it, but I'm also worried. And this is where the researchers, we have a role to play here. So I like the concept of regenerative. I mean, we do have this UN decade on ecosystem restorations, right? That goes in a similar direction. I like regeneration is a little bit more interesting because it is a social component. There's a social component, there's an economic, there's an environmental component. I like this a lot. But the only thing that I would say, we need to have speed here as the research world, is to ensure that that word is not overused and diluted to nothing. And that will mean that regeneration and regenerative tourism, regenerative, whatever that is actually based on a set of indicators, that there is definition, that we know how to measure it, we know how to report it, everything that we've been trying so hard to do for sustainability for decades. And let's face it, on a sustainability component, we are there. I mean, we are there because I'm saying we are there because we have ESG reporting happening that's going to be mandatory, that sets the base on all of those measures. So we've managed to bring an industry almost there, yeah, by 2024, 2025. This is setting the sustainability. Regeneration is one step ahead, of course, one step, it's a higher level as what was mentioned. The issue here is anyone is going to want to be, if I ask my students, do you prefer nature positive or net zero? They will tell you, I definitely prefer nature positive, simply because it sounds so good. Net zero sounds extremely boring in comparison. It's the same thing. Sustainability, it's been used in all sorts of forms, but in fact, if you look at indicators and performance indicators measurements, we're pretty much there. I mean, we have a lot in place already. It's not necessarily implemented in all businesses, but we have that. And as I said, performance on ESG is going to be there. So that's that. We have the indicators. We know this is what we have to do. For regeneration, it's free for all right now. Do you know what I mean? Like, what does nature positive, what does regeneration on a social component, the well-being measures we have? There's really a lot of different, there's 20 or more probably. I'm not a well-being expert, but I know at least of 20 different measures of looking at well-being. Same thing for the environment, the biodiversity. It's extremely complex. I mean, carbon is carbon, but nature, biodiversity, and ecosystem services, extremely more complex. So when we talk about regeneration, I like it very much. I think this is great. It's a nice way to go at it, because it includes restoration, it includes so many of the positive topic, but we need to be able to settle down and say, this is what will matter in regeneration. Otherwise, it's going to be hijacked as a term.
Like sustainability that hijacked
yeah,
many times. Thank you very much again, Willy. We have a few more questions, but unfortunately we don't have time. We will send a question to Willy to answer, and we will post in JHTM social media account and page. Again, thank you very much, Willy, for accepting our invitation and for your informative and very interesting presentation and keynote. I'm sure all participants enjoy this that presentation slot, as Willy mentioned, will share with you, with all of you, and we will continue our research symposium for workshop. We will have 2 parallel workshops in about 8 minutes. So the two parallel workshop will be first okay, let me go through workshop. We will have a research agenda for event management and event tourism, and also design and publish mixed method research. But for these 2 workshops, we will have 2 different meeting room and Zoom link. So you will receive the Zoom link for each workshop. Please enter specific Zoom link for each workshop that you are interested and enjoy workshop. So based on this, I can conclude this session and close this room, and we will meet you in workshop room, and will continue research symposium JHTM 2022. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mostafa. Have a great evening.
Thank you all, and see you in workshop.